Release the Jeffrey Epstein client list. Say what we know about unidentified flying objects. Just give it to us straight. Every politician dances to the tune, like a circus monkey, to their biggest donor.
How do you expect to unite the United States when you struggle to do so with Roivant?
I think the way we're going to unite this country is by...
But before we get into it, guys, I've been getting interested into politics lately, if you couldn't tell from the guests we've had on the Iced Coffee Hour. And I gotta say, I am incredibly disappointed when I tune into Fox or I tune into CNN and the headlines are completely different, yet they're reporting on the exact same thing. It's made me insanely disappointed at the bias that exists.
Here in the Iced Coffee Hour, we really do our best to hear as many different perspectives as possible, but we can't do something like this on our own. That's why we've decided to partner with our sponsor, Ground News, to help bridge the gap and help get the entire picture across.
Ground News is an app and website that assesses media bias so you make sure you're not just listening to one perspective only. They also show you the bias in specific articles and just media in general by indicating whether it's a left-leaning website or a right-leaning one.
They also have a blind spot feature that shows you articles that are being underreported by either the left or the right, so that way you could get the entire picture.
Understanding the bias in the media is incredibly important if you actually care about solving the problems and knowing why things are happening.
So if you're interested in signing up for Ground News and seeing exactly what's going on in the media, our link is down below in the description, or go to ground.news/iced. It's only $5 a month after getting 30% off using our link down below in the description.
Once again, guys, it's ground.news/iced for 30% off with the link down below in the description. On top of it all, we just really appreciate Ground News for sponsoring this video and also just performing the service that they do for all of us, making sure we're aware of all of the bias that exists in media. So with that said, thank you so much, Ground News, and on to the episode.
Thank you so much for having us on.
Thanks for coming over, guys. It's good to be here.
I will say one of the biggest criticisms that I've seen from people who watch you is that they know your stances, they know your policies, but they feel like they don't actually know you as a person. Yeah. They kind of feel like you're this human chat GPT.
Yeah, I've been
but they
called
don't,
that.
They don't know you.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, growing up, what did you want to be?
You know, I went through, like most young people, a lot of different phases. My parents, I think, acclimatized us to think of being a doctor when we grew up. My mom was a doctor. A lot of our family members, uncles and aunts were too. I think that came, though, from more of a place of financial security. My parents came to this country with not a lot of money, and part of that immigrant mentality is just a very defensive instinct, which is, how are you going to have, you know, a stable, secure life? So that's kind of the defensive environment in which we were raised. I you know, at points along the way, look at what other kids' parents are doing, thought maybe I would be a lawyer at times. That seemed like not a career that called me in terms of being in a service profession. I honestly kept an open mind when I went into college, but there wasn't something that I thought of that to say that this is definitely what I want to be. I had
like, what about as a kid?
Figures and mentors.
Like you're like 5 years old.
Oh,
what
did
you didn't want to be an investment banker when you were
No,
five.
I think I wanted to play. I think I wanted to be a basketball player.
Really?
Basketball.
Yeah.
You're taller than I expected you.
Oh, thank you. People do say that to me. Actually.
Yeah,
I don't know why
How
everybody
tall are you,
says
6
that.
feet tall?
I'm about 6. Yeah.
Yeah.
Short for the NBA though.
Fair enough.
Not NBA
Fair
standards.
enough.
Yeah. In principle, you can achieve everything you ever want within the limitations of what God has given you as
So
your
when
talents.
did you
to make
realize
yourself.
that like basketball's not going to be a thing?
Probably
How old were
around
you?
probably around 4th grade. Yeah,
Fourth
this
grade.
was just realistically not going to be. I might have made the select team, but then there's the AAU league, which is you guys have no reason to know this, but that's kind of where it gets really serious. And I was getting nowhere near that, and so I ended up switching sports to tennis, where I thought I had a better shot of actual success, and ended up doing well too. But that wasn't going to be in the cards to be a professional tennis player either. But a lot of the people that I played with did end up going to the pro tour, and it's a very different life.
How were you as a kid growing up?
It's hard to know.
Are you a good
Now that I'm a
student?
parent,
Yeah.
you kind of think about what you were like. I was somebody who probably I was pretty social, enjoyed meeting other kids. I was probably a kid who conversed with, when my parents would have their own adults or whatever over before my younger brother was, he's 4 years younger than me, but before he was of age, I was also able to probably be comfortable talking to people older than me or whatever. That was just the environment that my parents raised me in. I was always pretty curious, I think. I like to explore new things. I've always enjoyed almost debate and arguing and storytelling.
Where do you think you got that from? And that inquisitive mind?
It's a good question.
Were your parents like that?
Some
Did
people
you-
are just born like that.
I don't think I turned out the way that my parents intended to mold me. And I mean that in a good way. I think that they wanted a guy who put his head down, followed the rules, learned how to do something useful, built a successful and stable career and a family that had more security than they had or felt like they had when they were in this country. That was their, mindset for me. Like the kind of thing that you would hear in my household growing up would not be something like dream and be whatever you want to be when you grow up. No, it wasn't that. It was you need to focus and have stability and make sure that you have a clear path to a stable career. And that was instilled in us starting at a very young age. And so now that I'm talking through it with you guys, when you ask me where did that come from, I guess there's something innate probably in many kids that make them react
but it
against
overpowered.
what their parents, but there's a reactionary instinct. And so, I haven't had a conversation like this in a while, but it makes me think about maybe it was a reactionary impulse that led me to actually pursue a career as an entrepreneur and live a career life that was completely unstructured at every step of the way.
It's interesting because you kind of fit the mold of what your parents wanted from you for a very long time. I mean, especially with your job at Goldman Sachs. But then for some reason, it's like...
Actually, what's really just interesting is, for me, when I went to Harvard and then had an open-ended career plan, that alone was quite a bit of a leap. And then when I decided to potentially explore career paths outside of traditional science or medicine, that itself, I know that the way I look at it now, or the way we would look at it now, is that's like a pretty cut and dry, assembly line path. For my family's upbringing, that was a weird thing to do. That was already off the beaten path. They didn't know anything about what that world entailed. So yes, in some ways it was itself a much more, in retrospect, part of the assembly line path to go get an internship at Goldman Sachs. But if you ask my parents, that was like a foreign notion to them, which was interesting, actually.
But you still tried, or I guess had that like subconscious pushing on you that was like, okay, find like a high earning job that's stable, where you work a lot, which was the Goldman Sachs thing. But it seems like you still had this like thing that you were born with that was like, okay, no, we got to do something more creative. We got to do something that is
it was
higher risk.
It was definitely beaten into my head. So there's... there's both parts of you, right? I mean, if we all look inside each of ourselves and ask ourselves, who are we? I mean, there's the part that's beaten into you. I mean, I guess in Freudian terms, you call that, I guess, the superego or whatever. And then there's the inner self, and the combination of those two things create a blend of who we are as people. So yes, there was the part of me also that grew up with some sense of stability and trying the tried and true path. That's half of me. And then half of me just wants to break that and rebel against it, and or just explore my own creative self about where my passions actually lead me. Now, I would say that in that summer internship, where I chose, it's probably one of the choices. If I was to go back again, I probably wouldn't have chose that particular summer internship. But I learned a lot from it in retrospect. And yet, even my senior year in college, that was part of what probably motivated me to start my first business, which I did in my senior year after that internship after my junior year, which is my first business that I founded. But I probably did it in some ways out of feeling constrained by that first summer internship.
So it seems like you very much want to have free will to go with what you want. Did you ever get in trouble with your parents growing up?
Yes, I mean, but like nothing extraordinary.
You were fairly obedient, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, like I wasn't like a kid who I was not the kid who ended up in detention.
But you were also highly opinionated.
Yeah,
like back in the
much.
day when you were a kid, did your opinions ever get you into trouble with your peers? Did you ever get into a fight, or did you ever like get bullied or something?
So I went to a public school from 1st through 8th grade. It wasn't a particularly great public school, but it was a public school that was the one we were districted in nonetheless. That was a place where actually being the straight-laced academic, put your head down, go to science class kind of kid wasn't actually particularly rewarded. And so there was probably one instance, this is what caused my parents to switch me out of that public school to go to a Jesuit high school. There was a flight of stairs. I was carrying my science books from class to class, got pushed down that flight of stairs, resulted in me we think that was the cause, about a few months later having to get a hip surgery.
Who pushed you?
It was a random kid.
There's no
Did
way
you have
a
a
kid
history
just
with
walks
this kid?
No, it's actually really
random,
interesting. Yeah, it's really random. A lot of these kids grew up in difficult backgrounds.
Yeah.
So this is a school where a lot of kids in the classes, they weren't in my classrooms necessarily, but were like 1 or 2 years left behind. there was a wing of the school called the success wing, which is the wing that they would tell kids like me to stay away from, because these are kids who may be 14, 15 years old, but are still in, 7th grade.
But they called it the success wing?
That's the wing that they called.
That sounds a
So you
bit
want a
counterintuitive.
positive
Well, yeah,
affirmation,
it is
Jack.
counterintuitive. But the
wanna-
success wing was, I probably
Yeah.
went in there for one class ever, but the success wing was the wing that you stayed out of. But yeah, it's a place where, you got a nerdy kid with, glasses and carrying his science textbooks from class to class who's an academic guy. That's a target. But that was also a good experience for me because, you're an outsider in that setting. That's fine. But I went to a different school setting where I was an outsider, which was St. X High School in Cincinnati. So that was a Catholic high school.
Yeah.
I was a lone Hindu kid, and that was also an interesting learning experience too. And so I've probably always been in settings where I have been comfortable, grew to be comfortable, I would say,
Yeah.
in being in settings where I was, often the odd man out.
So
And that's kind of was my big part of my upbringing.
What happened to the bully afterwards?
I don't
the guy
remember.
pushed you.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it was like I didn't go running to a teacher. We didn't like. I don't.
Really?
I mean, it was. I think probably nothing. I couldn't even remember who the kid was. It wasn't a kid who was in my classes or in, because we were, they had slightly advanced classes or slightly remedial classes. There were different classrooms, but in between classes, it's the same group of kids going together in one school, and probably nothing happened.
And you actually like tumbled down a flight of stairs.
Yeah, we were pushed down a flight of stairs.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it happens. It's the kind of stuff that goes, growing up. It's probably the biggest instance of what I would call the closest thing to bullying that I experienced. But it was definitely something that, a teacher of mine then pulled my parents aside when they picked me up from school. They're like, you need to get this kid the heck out of here. And he was a teacher in that school.
So when I was in high school, I observed two different predominant archetypes of the student, which is like those who work extremely hard and have to study consistently to get good grades, and they feel pressured usually by their parents or by some other factor to like put their nose to the book and like grind, versus those where school kind of just came easy. They would get good grades, but they wouldn't have to study as much as the other person. I'm wondering which one of those two would you say you were? Because I see you're like ultra successful,
Thank you,
right?
man.
Hundreds of millions of dollars. You're running for president, which is just insane. Like which archetype would lead to this future?
I don't think that you could necessarily predict one as a path. I think one of the things that's just my honest answer. If I was to think back which one I fit, there's probably elements of both. I mean, we did have parents who were very focused on the traditional path to educational achievement, come home, do your homework, etc.
But did it come easy to you?
But yeah, I mean, I think that everybody has their native talents, and I think doing well in school was something that I was naturally prone to do, and write or read or learn or do math well. Yes, I mean, joining the NBA wasn't in the cards for me, but the equivalent of that for academic achievement was, just to be blunt about it. And so I'm not sure that it's the compliant, shut up, sit down, do your homework mentality that automatically yields a particular result. I think it's different for different people. I mean, my wife was maybe on the other side of that. She's also incredibly academically successful, one of the smartest people I've met. But, I think that for her, it was much more libertarian in her upbringing compared to my parents' focus, just because they moved around to different places, and so it was her love of learning that guided her. I also had a natural love of learning, but it was in an environment that was much more structured.
disciplined.
But I think it would be probably reductionist and overly trying to fit a square peg into a round hole kind of thing, to sort of think that there's one trajectory of parental upbringing that leads to one thing and
right,
another
but I think
that
we
leads
could
to
draw
another.
patterns. Like
Yeah,
if you have
maybe.
disciplinarian parents that tell you this is the structure that you should be, and then you have to learn and teach yourself to be disciplined, to do all of your work, and to read cross your T's and dot your I's and stuff like that. I do think that does have some long-term effect, contrary to the person that has like the natural, innate, inherited intelligence that learns to be lazy. They learn they can cut corners and stuff like that, and it comes from a more like creative problem solving type brain.
I think so. I think that if we're going to draw that out, though, I think that there's definitely more than two tracks.
Of
or two
course,
types
but those
there.
are I would say like those
Yeah.
are the two predominant archetypes that I observed in high school.
How old are you, if you don't mind me asking?
24.
You're 24?
Actually,
You're
I'm still
33.
24. Yeah.
What's that?
33.
You're 33?
Yeah.
Oh, you look younger.
Thank you.
You're not at an age where that's a compliment yet. It's just a fact. Now that I've become a parent myself, and also just reflecting on seeing a lot of people who've pursued a lot of different journeys, I think that when kids show up, like even at like a very young age. In many ways, they're wired. They are who they are. They're just like, I've got 2 young sons. They're both, one of them's 3.5, one of them's a year old. They're very different people, and we're raising them in the same circumstances. Like, we're not doing anything that's that different for one than the other, but they're different predilections. One of them talked earlier than the other one. The other one got up on his feet and is like far more physically dexterous and physically exploring, versus the other guy is more verbal and emotional exploring. And I think that in some ways the cake isn't fully baked, but like it's like a half-baked cake when it shows up. And so how much ever you will to tame that or mold that, I think is a failed pursuit, versus then there's the separate question of, are you in an environment where that inner self is able to become the maximal version of whatever it's going to be, versus an environment that sometimes can choke that out of existence for a long time, or an environment that, and this might have been my experience of this, that wasn't really like fitted to what my new true inner nature was, but that actually helped me hone it and discover it even more. I think that was my experience of it. It depends on what kind of underlying person almost was born into their bodies that found themselves in that circumstance.
So I'm curious, if you could change anything with the way your parents raised you, what do you think that would be?
I'm not sure I would. I wouldn't be who I am. We're each the product of our own experiences. So I'm not. There's a few cases where I might look back in life and say there's a few things that I would have done differently, and even still, there's not that many of those, because like I'm not even a person to dwell on that. Maybe I should have taken Spanish instead of French in high school. Like that'd be on the list for me. I would have been better at speaking the relevant language because I would have used it more. But I'm not wired to think about that, because the truth is who I am today is absolutely a product of the experiences that led me here. And so to say that I would have wished for one of those experiences that was different, either in a decision that I made or that my parents made, is almost like rejecting some aspect of myself today.
But I guess, how are you parenting your children differently than how your parents raised you?
Well, I think there's a couple realities. One is our children grow up in far more comfortable circumstances than I did. I think that raises both opportunities and concerns. I worry a little bit about, I think part of who I am, the scrappy nature of who I am, comes from a kind of insecurity that you pick up from your parents. It's hard to recreate something that isn't, necessarily
manufactured a little bit.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And on the flip side, I think that we are wide open to our kids deciding for themselves what it is, discovering for themselves what it is they want to do. My older son right now wants to be a fighter jet pilot. That was not within the Overton window of acceptable career options.
Well, that sounds fun, though. Yeah,
it does sound fun, actually.
But as a father, I bet you that's a little. You're like, oh, hold on.
I think
at that
actually
age,
not at all. I think,
you don't think so?
No, I don't think
that
so.
age, I think it's great.
And that's
I
totally
would be
different.
so
from my
nervous for the
outlook.
safety of my kids.
Oh, they're 3 years. Come on,
But
3 years old.
But even if he goes and become a fighter jet pilot, that's something he's passionate about doing. That's pretty awesome.
That is cool.
And I think that's just a different outlook. Now, it's interesting to think about this. I can't say that one of those approaches is better or worse than the other. It's just the nature of where we are in our lives versus where our parents were in their lives. And I'm a product of that upbringing that would bring up my kids in a different way than my parents did. But that doesn't mean that I wish that my parents did it any differently.
So
if that makes any
for
sense.
your kids, would it bother you if they wanted to pursue a career that made no money whatsoever? Like, let's just say I want to...
Totally fine with that.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So it seems like your parenting style is like worlds different than the parenting style you were subjected to when you were a kid.
Yeah.
Because you're like,
So far
do
it
whatever
is.
you want, kids.
Yeah.
So it did
I mean,
change
do whatever you want.
you.
We try to teach them. We do our
Right,
best
teach
to
them
instill in
ethics
them.
and-
Yeah, and also
Yeah.
understanding the consequences of their actions, but to empower them to be able to make those decisions for themselves.
Interesting.
Absolutely.
But would you want them, if their future career made no money, would you feel good supporting them financially through that? Like, let's just
No,
say they wanted to be an artist. Let's
Yeah.
just say they made no money whatsoever, but they're like, I love art. I'm passionate about this. Then the money would have to come from somewhere.
Well, if you're a good artist, maybe the money comes from making
Possibly,
art. Right?
yeah.
So there's that. So I think that there's a sweet spot zone for the optimal upbringing that you maybe be able to give your kids from a material perspective. I think that if you don't have enough money to send your kids to a good school and you're in a bad school district or whatever, and relates to some of my policy issues, which we can talk about another day, then I think that you're at a disadvantage. I mean, if you're not able to get the same kind or quality of education as peers your age, you're at a disadvantage. On the other hand, if you're raised in circumstances where you have nothing to actually aspire to because you're just showered and swimming in wealth that it crowds out your own ability to have hunger and scrappiness, and I've gone to college and law school and otherwise with people who fit that description. I think that's a kind of disservice that you can do for your kid as a parent too. And so our goal for our kids will be allow them to have the true luxury. This is a real luxury to be able to pick the career that allows you to follow your passions without fear of putting food on the dinner table. But that doesn't mean that you have a right to fly around in a private jet because of the career that you chose.
Do you think that might stifle motivation, knowing that there's always a fallback?
Yeah, I wonder about it. It might. I mean, I think that that's a risk. You know, a lot of kids might end up. I know a lot of people who have ended up. I think some of them are even in my own extended family who ended up in careers that they're like fine or perfectly complacent with, but isn't exactly what they would have chosen if they were following their true passion. They did it out of the need for achieving a level of financial security, and then they pursue hobbies that may more align with their passions. And nothing to say with anything wrong with that model. I suppose most people work for the sake of putting food on the dinner table, but make sure that work isn't the entirety of their life so that they're able to pursue their passions outside of work. I'm a little bit different. The path I've pursued is one where I don't really draw a distinction between work and hobby and passion and pleasure. The way I'm spending my time all the time, as best I can, is directed towards something that I'm incredibly passionate about. And that's the ultimate win, I think, is to be able to live a life where you're able to do that. You can't do that if you literally, I mean, we're human beings. We're like have certain basic needs. You need a shelter over your head or food or drink for sustenance, right? So if you literally can't do those things, then yes, you're not able to achieve self-actualization by following your passions through your work. I think that the boundary we'd like to draw for our kids is to give them the opportunity to pursue their passion without fear of putting food on the dinner table. Fine. But that doesn't mean that you're going to live a life of opulence and luxury automatically because of that either. No, that could come through being an exceptional artist or musician or creator of whatever kind you want to be. But part of the trade-off of making whatever choice it is you're passionate enough to do that regardless of whether that's the actual reason you're doing it, to accumulate green pieces of paper. That's not a reason to pursue a track as a singer or a artist or whatever. You should do it because of your passion. And if you were doing it because it was going to accumulate you green pieces of paper, then that's not following your passion. That's just the equivalent of going to work as a janitor or a cab driver or anything else that's doing it for the money. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. What are your hobbies outside of work? What do you enjoy?
To tell you the truth, I do.
I know you like. I know
enough.
you love work. I'm the same way.
Yeah.
But
so,
like,
so
if you
I have
take
fun
that
doing what I do.
aside,
I play tennis.
Besides, okay.
Yeah, I'm a tennis fanatic.
Okay.
The presidential campaign has not been great for my tennis game, but until this kicked off, probably since I turned maybe 29 or 30, for the last 7-8 years, yes, tennis has been a big passion, both watching and playing. I used to play growing up, and so that's something that I try to keep up as much as I can.
Is there anything besides that?
In terms of like fun hobbies?
Yeah.
So when kids came into the picture, one of the things is that does eat into your hobby. You got to pick
hobbies.
You get to pick one or two. I did enjoy for a while good film and good theater, like good movies and or good live production. Yeah, so that would be something. And then writing is a hobby of mine too, actually. Just free form, carry around a notebook, long form writing. And some of the argumentative stuff, sure, I'll publish, and you can see it and wherever I've published this stuff. It's probably what resulted in me writing 3 books over the last couple of years. I was probably a suppressed author without knowing
Sure.
it. And so writing is a hobby of mine as well.
You've also mentioned before that you are vegetarian for religious and moral reasons, and that you also don't partake in any sort of like drinking or vices, like smoking anything as well. I'm just curious, like, why do you decide to, like, how is it a moral reason to be vegetarian from your perspective? Because for me, I like eating meat. I think it tastes great and all, but morally, I'm conflicted on it. How do you draw that distinction between, like, okay, for your own personal sake, you deem it as immoral,
Yeah.
and also
So-
for the other vices?
Well, I think there's the choices that we make in our own lives that are totally different from the policy perspectives
Of course.
that
of
we
course.
offer on others, right? So I've been a CEO of a company. Well, do we serve meat at company events? Yes, we do. Because I believe that each person is able to make the choices that they deserve to make that's best for them. And certainly from a policymaking perspective, I'm a hard libertarian when it comes to people being able to
Right.
make whatever decisions suit them and not legislating one form of morality. So put that to one side. I was raised in a vegetarian household, but the reason I remain vegetarian is that all else equal, I would rather not kill an animal for my culinary pleasure. If my life depends on it, absolutely. Not going to think twice. If my nutrition actually depends on it, like if I'm going to be less healthy in some way, absolutely, I would do it in a heartbeat, no problem. Because I do think that that's a trade-off that's justified. If it's going to allow us to live a more effective life, then absolutely. So are there circumstances in which I would do it? Absolutely. But I'm able to get that in ways that don't require killing a sentient being. If I can do it that way, I'll do it that way. That's the way I look at it.
And then what about the no drinking stance?
I'm not a hard liner. I just prefer not to be intoxicated. I prefer to be in control. Like, that's just part of the freakish nature of my control freak nature of myself, is I don't want to do things that, like, everything I want to do, I want it to be a conscious decision.
When did you make that decision? When did you realize that?
Probably like at a pretty young age. I mean, I like to be in control of the situations that I'm in. And I think that I've seen what it's done to friends, and I don't care to subject myself to addictions that allow me to lose control over myself or who I am.
Was there a specific moment?
That's not a moral decision, right? I think there's nothing immoral about having alcohol, or nothing immoral about smoking a cigarette. I mean, those are health decisions that you want to make for yourself.
Was there a specific moment, though, that changed your opinion on drinking or smoking?
No, I don't think so. I think that I'm open-minded. I mean, it's not like I won't have a sip of alcohol, but it's not like it's like poison. I have to like spit it out, right? But I just don't like being intoxicated. And I think that I did grow up in a household where neither of my parents drank, so maybe that was sort of a natural conclusion for me to come to. I also have friends who have become alcoholics and have suffered through that reinforced my belief set as I grew up. It's the same part of me that likes to get a good night of sleep. I feel good and at my best the next day. That I don't want to feel hungover the next day, and I don't want to feel inebriated when I'm enjoying life plenty as it is. I don't even drink I rarely drink caffeine, actually. I don't have coffee. I have enough energy as it is.
Where does the energy come from? We recently had a guest on our podcast that said, what was it? Like, of the uber successful, there is a
hypomania.
Hypomania.
Yes.
It's a very, very rare trait or gene that some people have. It's like a super gene where it means that you can get crazy energy off of very little sleep.
I for better or worse, I have a lot of energy.
So you
And
probably
I'm
have
able to
hypomania.
co-distance.
Yes.
Yeah, I don't know about the term, but I definitely am somebody who has a lot of energy. As long as I'm doing something that I think is worthy and interesting, yeah, I can run on very low fumes and be pretty high functioning.
So I'm curious, who else in
every
your
step of
family
the way.
has that trait?
My mom has that trait for sure.
There we go.
She is also not a coffee drinker.
Okay.
And like, to tell you the truth, I don't know what would happen if I drank coffee. Like, I think I might explode. It's just like
I
a
would
dangerous
love to
combination.
see this.
Yeah, it's probably not great. Even if I have like a tea, and
It just gets you going.
It's a little bit like I'm not even thinking clearly. Especially if I'm like tired, like after not like a great night of sleep, but then have a tea. It's like, oh no, I can't deal with that. I'd rather not have the caffeine, and I'm good at finding the energy.
Our prior
inside.
guest said that a lot of that is genetic, that you would
I
inherit
bet
that
that
trait
is.
from a parent or close relative.
Yeah, I bet that's genetic.
Interesting. I want to talk a little bit about.
There's far more that's genetic than we understand, for sure.
That's
I
what
believe that
And I think
too.
we're wired the way we are. And that goes to my whole point about the upbringing piece of this is I just think it is overly false precision to think that there's some kind of formula to all of this. We're complicated beings. Each of us is unique in our own ways. And to think that some model of molding you is going to result in some very precise outcome, I just don't think it works that way.
How much would you say is genetic versus upbringing in terms of maybe someone's success, life, motivation, future?
I mean, both are important, but I think that we would like to... The fairy tale side of us wants to say that you can achieve anything you want with your own hard work and commitment and dedication. The fact of the matter, that's not true. There's no chance I was ever going to make it to the NBA, despite the fact that I would have wanted to when I was in second or third grade. And so I think what I think of as, this isn't exactly your question, but just to get my own thoughts on the table is, what do I think of as the spirit of what we mean when we say that in America? Meritocracy or merit or unbridled excellence. What do we mean is whatever your God-given talents are, and each of us, the three of us, I'm sure have three different ones, whatever they are. Any two different people have different God-given talents. Whatever your God-given talents are, that you live in a society that allows you to achieve the maximum of your God-given potential without anybody standing in your way. Right? So that's what I think about. That's what I think is beautiful about this country. That was the opportunity that I was given in this country. I think that's the opportunity this country gives everybody. That's what's special about the United States of America. How much of that is God-given talent versus God-given gifts of other kinds, like parenting or circumstance or otherwise? Depends on the attribute you're talking about. I mean, if you're talking about athletic talent, well, let's talk about athletics. I think that if you want to be anywhere from the 0th to the 70th percentile, most of it is probably just effort and commitment and passion and dedication. If you want to go between the difference between like the 98th percentile and the 99.9th percentile, it's absolutely genetics that make that difference of the increment of whether or not you're able to go that final distance, controlling for somebody who has been passionate in that respect. And so we could say that for athletics, but I think there's probably other domains of life for which that's generally true too. And so I hate to draw an overall rule of thumb, but we'll use the athletics as a model. It's probably not too far off the mark for other domains that we could think of too, to say, if you want to be in the 0 to 70th or even the 0 to 90th percentile of a given domain, which is to say you're pretty darn good, better than 9 out of 10 people who do it, your effort and your dedication and your hard work and your passion and your upbringing and your commitment will get you pretty much as far as you want to go. But if you want to go to that final increment of being that, what we call it that for a reason, freak of nature, right? I mean, the people who are winning championships in athletics or comparable non-athletic domains, the true freaks of nature, we call them that for a reason, is that it was a product of, nature, actually.
It's both. I feel
It's
like
both.
take
Yeah,
the
it's
Kobe
definitely both.
Bryant's, It's
Kobe Bryant, no matter, you could have somebody else, I would venture to say any of the three of us that worked as hard on the basketball court as Kobe Bryant is, we're still not going to be doing what he was doing at the peak of his game.
Yeah.
And that's okay. It's a beautiful thing. We should celebrate that. You think about it, why are we opposed to athletes using performance enhancing drugs or anabolic steroids or whatever? Is that it ruins our ability to celebrate that native talent.
Right.
I mean, like, let's say we talk about Kobe Bryant, maybe 30 years from now, we can have AI programmed humanoid robots that will do on a basketball court what like the combination of Kobe Bryant and LeBron James could never do, or on a tennis court Novak Djokovic could never dream of doing. I wouldn't want to watch that. Now, some people might say I'm wrong about that. Maybe we will. And I would draw a distinction. The thing you'd be admiring there would be like computer programming coding.
Right.
So there may be room for, like we talk about tennis and pickleball. There may be AI ball later, which is like the equivalent of like the AI version of humanoid, AI programmed robots playing tennis, and they're like hitting the ball like way harder than like a normal human tennis player is. But you're admiring a different thing there. And in some ways, that's even part of what's baked into why we separately enjoy men's and women's sports differently. I'm just thinking out loud.
It kind of reminds me of
but
F1.
That's probably why both are. If you want just the people who are going to hit the hardest or pat or just like see the ball fly the fastest. That's not what you're really admiring. You're admiring people competing to the outer edge of what natural capability endows combined with effort. And I think there's something about us that admires that. So like, you know, I mean, men's and women's sports, we can celebrate each one differently, partly because that's what's baked in. What were you saying about F1?
F1, a lot of people that celebrate F1, surprisingly, are engineers, like mechanical engineers, because they love to
That's part of the
appreciate
essence of it, yeah.
all of the stuff that goes into creating the vehicles. It's not necessarily like watching a bunch of people go super fast around a track.
Yeah,
My
that's
friend
the
who's a
essence
mechanical
of it,
engineer
actually.
is like
Yeah.
super into all of that stuff, not for like watching the races, but like the mechanics behind building such a machine.
Yeah, it's a great point. And so I think we can admire different things in different experiences, but it's okay to acknowledge that some of that is nature that we're celebrating, expressed through us as
sure.
human beings. And that's a beautiful thing too.
I do want to bring up relationship advice, because
Sure.
you said in your book, Woke Inc., that your parents got an arranged marriage.
Yeah.
Which is, I mean, like growing up in the United States, growing up in Southern California is
We just
nuts
don't
to hear.
see that,
Like,
yeah.
like we think that stopped existing 100 years ago.
It's nuts, but it's not as nuts as you think, actually, because it's kind of come full circle.
Well, they've been
actually.
married 40 years
Oh, they're very
successfully.
successful.
And you also
Yeah,
said,
marriage.
wasn't the marriage like 12 days after their first real date?
Yeah,
of,
I mean, it was
getting
like
to
it
know
was
each
like
other?
less than 2
Can you
weeks.
walk
after.
us through how does that happen?
Yeah.
So two families get together. They each
They
pick
knew
who
each
they
other
think.
before, right?
What's
the
the,
families
process
didn't know
like?
each other before, but they knew of each other like via network. So my mom was living up and growing up in Mysore, which is one part of India. My dad was in Kerala, and via family networks. And there's a lot of pre-vetting that went into it. We're like, all right, they're both educated. They're both like even like there's not some major mismatch in height, right? Like there's a lot of factors that go into this, right? Were they, academically inclined? They know what each other's interests are.
But what did they think about it? Like your dad and your mom, weren't they like,
It would just
I
be
want to
culturally
Nobody's
normal,
forcing it on
right?
them.
Yeah.
Nobody's forcing it on them.
They're down- they're cool with it?
The final consent for the decision, but to put them together and then say, hey, if you guys want to go with it, go with it. That sounds nuts compared to the environment we grow up, which is different than I'm about to get to where we are now. But the environment that I grew up in was one where you would date people that you might meet at school or at a bar or in a neighborhood or whatever and have an organic interaction that guides you. All the way now to Gen 3, where you have an algorithm that asks you for your preferences and asks you
Then
about
it's
your
just
height.
like right or left.
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
just like the
And
bar
it
is
doesn't seem
set.
effective,
that
which is
seems-
weird.
That's exactly. So that seems a lot more similar to me than like to what my parents' arranged marriage was. You're
Yeah.
arranged by AI today instead of arranged by human beings who love you. So I like the way it went for me, which was my wife and I met at a party, and we were naturally drawn to each other, and we had an immediate human chemistry that we then followed and led us to the life that we've pursued, and that's cool. But what the irony now of, yes, we can look back and say like arranged marriages are weird, but it's equally weird from my frame of mind to look at like algorithmically set up anonymity for swiping left and right. There's senses in which, I just went to a wedding with one of my best friends who met exactly in that same setting, but it felt like it wasn't so different than the setting in which my
But
parents met, which is kind of funny and interesting.
How did they get married after 12 days? Why 12 days? Is it like after
I mean,
that,
12
after
days
a
is
week
pretty
and a half?
short, if you ask me. So I'm not.
But like,
I'm
whose
not
decision
endorsing?
was
I'm
that?
not
Like,
endorsing that
was
model.
that their parents saying get
No,
married
I-
after 12
no, I
days, or
don't
were they
think
just
so.
like, well,
I think
let's not waste any time?
I think it's sort of somewhere in between, where now you can also look at like people who I know, maybe you guys know as well, who've like, yeah, we've been together for 6 years and we're deciding whether we want to get engaged. At a certain point, it's like, dude, have
Figure
some
it out.
conviction in your relationship.
What do you feel like is too long?
Right.
What do you
I
feel
mean,
like
it's
is
true, right? Like,
No,
just,
it's a fair
just
point,
like,
yeah.
you know,
What's too long to get engaged? What would you say is a point where, as a guy, it's like
I
by
think
this
that-
time?
I
What's too
think
short? What's too long
I
from
mean,
your
this
perspective?
is broad strokes.
Yes,
right? Like,
we
it is just-
understand.
this is not. We're not making policy here. We're.
Maybe we should.
I just
Yeah.
think like if I was talking to a friend,
Yeah.
right, and my friend has been like, if he's been engaged for 3 years, but they're postponing the wedding, I was like, something's off.
Interesting.
Something's off, right? Why get engaged then, right? Or why have the level of partial commitment without just going all in? So that's an instinct that's baked in there. Does that mean 12 days is the right answer? Probably not in the modern society, but part of these are societal norms that are baked into the society you grow up in. And so I think if your engagement is measured in years.
Well, I'm saying
At least
from
if
the
you're my
time
friend or
from the
whatever,
time
I would
of
say, hey,
meeting
think about it.
from the time
about
of
whether-
meeting somebody to the time where you get engaged. Like, how
Yeah.
long does it take to
I mean,
get to
that
know
depends
somebody?
by person. I think that a lot of people, though, would tell you who are in happily married relationships that are built to last. And I'm grateful and feel fortunate to the world, to God, that I'm in one of those relationships now. But I think I'm one of these people, but many people I know would tell you the same thing. Within a matter of weeks and at times within days,
You'll know.
you know.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
So against that backdrop, like 12 days isn't nuts. But I think if you're talking about within a period of months, if you're serious, right? Like, it's one thing to just be like, oh, I'm hanging out with this person and I'm dating like
Right.
5, whatever. I don't, what the culture is right now, but dating 5 people at the same time. And, I'm not going to, it's not like a particularly serious, relationship. Put that to one side. But if you're actually in a monogamous single person to single person committed relationship where you're invested in getting to know the other person and vice versa, chances are that if you are going to fast forward that 40 or 50 years and say that worked, more often than not, you knew that within the first several months first probably 3 months of being in that relationship.
Okay, a couple of points on this, because we just had Ben Shapiro on recently, and he said the exact same thing. He was
Did
like,
he?
you
Okay,
should-
it's
yeah,
interesting.
because he proposed to his wife at like 2 months, right?
It was early.
After they first
Yeah.
met. It was very quickly after they
It's not
first met.
but that doesn't strike me as crazy, right? Like,
Well, they
you
have
know,
a great
move on. Yeah.
relationship, plenty
Yeah.
of kids together. So as someone in the dating pool currently, what I'm so scared about is getting into a relationship and not feeling that immediate connection.
You don't need to be scared of it.
But here's the thing. It's like, I view relationships as a certain threshold that you have to exceed. And you're like, okay, a threshold of compatibility. Now I know I can be with this person for the rest of my life. But I do think that there is that like pinnacle relationship where you do meet someone and like right off the rip, you're like, okay, this is my person. And it's like, am I going to subvert my expectations to being, exceeding that threshold of compatibility?
Settling
Or
for normalcy.
like, but
versus,
there comes a time where you can't continue to date for 20 years and hold out for that pinnacle relationship, because then you'll be too old.
No, I know. I think that some of this is just, there's certain things that are in the cards for you in life and certain things that aren't. And I think there are many people who could be happy in a long run lasting relationship with the person who probably still isn't their soulmate. And that's a tough position to be in. But you know what? There's worse things that happen in life too, to a lot of other people
Fair.
that
Yeah.
may never find
sure.
that or may never find internal satisfaction either. So I can't speak for that. One of the things I am most grateful for in my life is that I was in a position to say that very quickly, here's a person I met and this was made to be, and it's obvious within a matter of months. And so we're just, fate is sealed. I wish that for every person. You're asking for the scenario of what happens if I'm not that.
I'm just
if I'm not
expressing
one of the people
a
who
personal
has that-
concern of mine, because
Yeah,
I've always
it's
held
fair.
out for like, I'm gonna meet that person where it's gonna be
Yeah.
like
But you're
12 days, like
24.
boom.
right?
Yeah, tomorrow I'm 25.
25. Happy birthday.
Yeah.
man.
Thank you.
So give yourself a few years. And I would say that probably there's a life staging thing. I guess I haven't been asked for this advice before, so, take it with a grain of salt. But I think it's probably a life staging thing where you give yourself the next 10 years to open yourself up to that possibility. And my advice during those 10 years would be, don't waste time in a multi-month relationship
That-
where
where you know it's not- yeah.
that's not going to be
Right.
that's not going to be fitting. Like, if 3 months in you're not sure, move on. That'd be my advice for at least the next 10 years of your life. Now you might get into your mid or late 30s later on, and you feel like you want to live a life that brings children into this world, that finds somebody you're compatible with, that maybe doesn't meet this idyllic standard. You can turn to that later. But give yourself the next 10 years to give yourself the maximal chance, as opposed to, I think what I've seen many of my friends go through as well is, I'll be in a relationship where it's compatibility for 3-4 years, but then you get to your late 20s and you're 29 and you're like, what do I do with that? And that was something that probably many of them regret, right? You could have, what was 4 years could have been 4 months, and give yourself, I think
that's
the
a great piece of
opportunity. So
advice
that'd be
right
my like for you specifically in the life stage you're in,
Thank you for the relationship.
would be the advice? You asked.
To tie the knot on this. To tie the knot. That's
Yeah,
fine.
there we go.
On this whole
Well done.
relationship thing, the one thing that you said that was super fascinating was comparing modern dating, like on algorithm-based apps, to arranged marriage. But the difference is, in arranged marriage, it's the people that probably know you most intimately, know your character, know your values, your personality, belief systems, versus you selecting for yourself what you're interested in, which is the modern dating way. And I find that a lot less effective. And if I'm correct, it's Carl Jung who said, when it comes to judging one's own character, everyone is horrible. Something like that. Like
You're
you
better
are
judging
not
others than your own. It's
Exactly.
Let me say something about that. I think the people who are making the modern dating apps would say something different. Is it's not even you choosing it.
Oh,
The
really?
AI will know better than you what you're being served.
But here's
up.
the thing, but the
Right? So
AI...
just because you put in your preferences of what you want to see,
Right. The AI
doesn't
still
mean
feeds you what
it's
they
actually going to
but-
feed you.
But
Okay, that's
wouldn't
what you
they
think
want
you
to?
want.
But
here's
wouldn't
what
they
you
want to
actually
give you the
want.
people that like you continue to date and stay on
Yes.
the app rather than the
They're
person
not
with,
about
like, a
matching people.
viable
They're-
Depends on the
partner?
app. So there's some that I mean, I'm not a
it
marketplace.
seems like
I know a ton
most
about.
want to keep you on as long
That's
as possible.
their business-
Tinder is
that's
something
their
that I've
business
heard.
incentive, right?
They show you
Versus-
the most attractive people first.
Yeah.
You swipe on them, and then it shows you an attractive. It's like a slot machine.
Yeah.
Where they show you an attractive person. I think it was like every 12 to 15 times.
They need to keep you on there.
Yeah, exactly.
So I mean, I'm not up on the latest of what the competitive landscape of these dating
Fair,
apps look like.
yeah.
But I would imagine there's a market niche for, at least back in the day, there used to be the ones that would, what was it, eHarmony or which one that would sort of promise you more, that what you're
Yeah.
in this for is not something in the short run, but something that's long run and lasting. But my only point is, the real question and the real debate is, do you trust an algorithm to do that well, or do you trust the people who
know you best.
know you best
Yeah.
to do that well, and a network and a tradition that makes that happen? So I'm certainly not planning to, and we have no vision that that's how things are going to play out for our kids. It's not how
Right.
it played out for
Right.
me. But all I'm saying is, what seems, even to me growing up, super weird as a model, now that we've entered the postmodern world, it actually makes that previous super weird model of
Right.
my parents seem a little less weird than it once did, because the postmodern
Yeah.
world isn't all that different.
It does seem, though, that there would be more pressure on your parents to get married because of all the family pressure that they put on the two. Versus them coming to their own decision, they could say, well, if our parents, say it's good, wouldn't that have such a big influence on them to believe
It
it's
probably did, that marriage is inherently good.
And the
Now,
stigma of divorce as well.
What's
like,
that?
For the cohesiveness
Oh,
of
totally.
arranged marriages,
Yeah.
there is a huge stigma. I
Stigma
feel like
to
in those
divorce.
communities
Absolutely.
too.
Oh,
in
yeah. If they got divorced and their
Absolutely.
family made that
But the
decision
divorce
for
rates
them,
are
I mean,
great
that would
amongst
be...
arranged marriages, from
What's
what
that?
I've heard. The divorce rates are like they're
well,
very
but
low.
part of it might
Yeah.
account for what you just said, which is that if it's tradition that brought you together via an arranged
Right.
marriage, it might be tradition that keeps people together in
Right.
unhappy marriages too. I don't think that's most of what's going on, but to be fair, that's a possibility in certain cases. I am somebody who believes that all else equal. I mean, each person's different. This doesn't mean for every individual, but all else equal, marriage is inherently good.
Mm-hmm.
Bringing children into the world in the context of a married household with two parents in the house is inherently good. I don't know that it's such a bad thing for us to adopt that cultural norm. I don't think the government should be enforcing it, but far from it. But I think it's okay for us to embrace a culture that says that all else equal, we're rooting for you to get married, ideally finding
I would agree with that.
that
I would agree with
soulmate,
that.
and that becomes part of a general cultural norm versus the postmodern slide of, well, maybe I will, maybe I won't. Well, maybe I'm a man and maybe I'm a woman, right? I mean, it just goes to, it can go to a level of, once you sort of feel like you're removing a lot of constraints, what it turns out you're doing is you're actually just creating new ones that often can leave you far worse off as a result. And so I think it's this tricky thing where,
It's like the paradox of choice.
yeah,
Isn't it
yeah,
that?
I think yes, I think it's well said. I think that you can become a prisoner of what you feel like is the optical illusion of choice, when in fact it's just a new kind of prison. And so I think we need some level. I think we probably benefit with some level of default structural norms in a culture, in a society, that we still have the freedom to opt out of.
For sure.
And I think that's probably the optimum that I would want to create for my kids, and not just using governmental power, but as a cultural norm, I think that's a good thing in our country to create a certain default ordering. But there's always going to be people for whom the right answer still isn't fitting in that order. There's still a path to opt out. And, I guess that's probably what my parents had, right? I mean, if my mom or my dad, either of them said that after those 12 days they don't want to do it, nobody was going to force them to do it. But there was a heavily culturally informed expectation that there's a good chance this is going to work. And as long as you have that opt-out, now there's not, we're just talking about marriage. We're talking about really anything, right? That if you're a man, you dress a certain way. You compete in certain sports in certain ways. But if you're a fully grown adult and you want to do it differently, we're not going to stop you.
Right.
No one's going to come to your house with the handcuffs and say you can't do it. But that if you bastardize and pervert that fetishization of choice to say that there's no default norm at all and there shouldn't be those defaults, I think you're just creating a new form of oppression and depression as a consequence. And I think we're veering too far in that direction.
I agree with that, but I also think that we do need to appreciate those that do go away from the norm. Whether or not we embellish it and you know what I mean, recommend it is a different thing, but we do need to appreciate and respect the abstraction from the norm.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, for those for whom that's the right choice.
Okay, so now we're going to go into more of a policy thing. By the way, I read Wokeism. I loved it. I loved it. And I want to say, I've always intuitively thought that there is so much commingling between corporate America and the
weird,
bureaucrats. Right? I've intuitively, it made so much sense to me,
Yeah.
but I never really felt like I had that confirmation. But this book, just I feel like I whoosh, you know what I mean? The Matrix got opened, which is insane. And I'm not just a full on just believer of everything.
It was a very honest book. I mean, I was not really filtering very much in that book. It was
for sure
what I felt at the time. I put it on a page, and that was that book.
Yeah, but no one's open about this because especially the people that they control the dissemination of information.
Right.
You know what I mean? So obviously, why would they out themselves as the people that muddy the waters?
Right.
So it doesn't really make any sense. But I really liked that book, and I'm going to recommend it to a lot of people. Yeah.
I hope a lot of young people read it. I mean, it seems a little less bold today than it was. Oh, come on, man. Yeah.
Some people
than it was at the time. But I mean, at the time when I wrote that book, the stuff in there, you were not allowed to say it.
Right, but it's so abstract still. And I do think that you go a little too nuanced and deep about it, where I think if you made it more of the problem with nuanced opinions, which is exactly what that whole book is about. Yeah, we're rolling.
Okay.
The problem with nuanced opinions is the fact that you need to justify it with so much data, so much supporting information that nobody is willing to pay attention to. And I found that to be one of the biggest issues today is that a lot of the times the correct opinions are the nuanced ones, but it's not exciting and it does require a lot more information.
Too much thinking.
Yeah.
Exactly. And your book was exactly that. It's in order to understand that framework, you do need all that supporting information, but nobody's going to go out of their way to figure it out.
Well, I hope that we change that because I think the truth is sometimes nuanced.
For sure.
And sometimes requires getting beyond just what is built to trend on algorithmically powered social media. And I do worry about the discursive impact of an internet that was built to mimic real life, and then we now have real life mimicking the internet. And I think that that's something I worry about. I don't have an obvious answer of how to change it.
Make it more exciting somehow.
Yeah.
I don't know how, but the truth isn't exciting enough. You know what I mean?
At times. I think there's a difference between exciting and beautiful.
Sure, but
I mean,
enticing. People want to try to reach the truth.
Yeah.
How do we make that more, I would say, enticing, appetizing?
Why is that desirable?
To reach the truth?
No, to make it more appetizing.
Because then I think
Because then
people digest it. I think people are more receptive to surface level basic ideas. They don't need to think too much about. But that interests them. And so how could you get people interested in something? If it takes too much work,
it's a kind of an age-old question of what if you have a good product, but you don't market it well.
Yeah, that's a good.
What's the point of having a good product? But
Right.
you have to operate within the constraint of making sure the marketing of the product doesn't change what the product actually is. And so, the truth in this particular case, a deep debate about cultural and political, circumstances in the United States in the year 2020 when I wrote that book, is there a more effective way to market that to reach a larger number of people without changing the underlying truth of what you're communicating? I'm sure there is, and I'm sure that I probably have been less effective than I can be. But for me, my goal in writing that book was not to reach the maximal number of people. It really wasn't. It was in many ways practicing out a hobby.
Get your thoughts out
Free
on
long
paper.
form writing, exactly. Yeah. And if I write down there what I actually mean, and nobody reads it but 10 people, yeah, that'd be disappointing. Certainly, part of me would be disappointed by that. But I'd rather do that and have it be true to who I am than to solve for what's going to reach the most people. That was easy in the case of writing the book. Where it actually becomes a lot harder is on a presidential campaign.
Yeah.
Right, because this is one giant popularity contest is what this feels like, actually. It's not what I expected. I think that policies have less to do with it than I expected coming into this.
So what do you think is the most important factor?
I'm not sure. I'm figuring it out right now. But policy,
To be beholden
for
to
me,
super
policy is
PACs,
very
probably.
important. I mean, I think that money's the most important factor. I mean, money is
To be a megaphone for super
tactically the
PACs.
most. It's not what I think should be the most important factor. There's two different questions. What I think should be the most important factor versus what is the most important factor. And I think that there's a big gulf between the two. And the reality is, I'd rather kind of do it like I did with Woke Inc., to make a bet on the universe and on the country and on our process, to say, I'm going to speak my convictions, and maybe people will hear them and maybe they won't. And if everything works the way it's supposed to work, then that means that if that's what the people of this country want, I'll be the next president. I feel good approaching it that way, and that I can put my head on my pillow at night regardless of the outcome. There's a version of the world where that just doesn't work. And what you need to do is you need to check certain boxes, particularly those that allow you to accumulate large-scale donors, really, to buy the ads needed to reach people, et cetera.
So do you think this is really an advertising thing? It's like, how many people can you get in front of? How much do you think it would cost?
I think spending, the person who wins this election this year all the way through is probably going to spend about $2 billion.
$2 billion.
Yeah.
So is that how much you think it would cost to be able to get elected president?
Well, I think that you can't get elected if you don't have a message that the people of this country don't
Correct.
want. But the distortions created by the amount of money that's spent via the super PACs completely distorts the system. So it's less that amount of money will win you the election. But the fact that that much money is being spent creating distortion and noise makes it much more difficult for a guy who's coming in from the outside and actually just expressing
Where do they
his own
spend
views
the
to be
money?
able to do
Where
it.
does $2 billion go?
Ads.
Where?
TV, radio, mail,
Billboards,
direct
probably.
mail,
But
billboards.
are those the people who show up to vote?
Yes, in primaries, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. The fact of the matter is, the Republican primary electorate, a lot of them, they're not the world that we're talking to right now. It's people who watch old school cable television. That's where they get their news, and old school radio, like AM, FM radio. That's the reality for the Republican primary
And when do you
electorate.
think that's going to change? Because eventually those people are going to
Slowly.
age out.
It's going to change, but I think the obviousness of the fact that it is going to change creates an illusion for how quick that's going to happen. I think it's like a 10 to 20 year time horizon.
I have a very blunt question. As somebody who is a part of that like ultra wealthy, upper echelon, like elite members of society and running for president, I am sure, as shown in your books, that you have access to and can observe the level of corruptness that exists in the United States.
Yeah.
Now, especially as you're running for president, are you surprised by it? How have you experienced corruption?
I am surprised by how broken and corrupt the political system is. And
You're surprised by it.
Yeah,
and
that
you
comes
probably
in as a
went
guy
in-
who's not naive to this, right? Who
Right.
has a baseline expectation that it's a broken system. It's far more broken than you expect.
How so? Because I'm a complete outsider to this. Like, how is it surprising? I have no idea.
I'll tell you, it's surprising because they create the illusion that it's not. So I'll just give you some, boring facts, but it helps you piece this together. The max amount you can give to a campaign in a primary for a presidential election is $3,300. Turns out you can donate another $3,300 for the general. So add that up. The most you can contribute to a campaign is $6,600. That's a lot of money for a lot of people, but it's not enough to
sway
buy
it.
off
Yeah.
a presidential candidate. It's just not, because it's going to cost $2 billion. There's a lot of people who can give $6,600. Why do we limit it at $6,600? We limit it because we don't want any one person to have undue or corrupting influence over our president. That's why we have that system. This is all a farce. That's not where the money, I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, but 90+% of the money that's been spent on this campaign season so far has not been spent by the campaigns of the individual candidates that are subject to these limits. It's spent by super PACs. These are these separate entities where there's no limit to how much money people can put in. They can put in $1 million. They can put in 10 million. They can put in 100 million. And you have people putting in tens, soon to be hundreds of millions as individuals.
Why do they do that?
To get influence.
So
So the very thing that we were
Yeah.
supposed to stop with the campaign thing, now the candidates, what they do is they show up at events hosted by the super PAC, where there are mega donors in that room, 10, 20 people giving millions of dollars apiece. That's who the candidate knows is actually funding their campaign. I mean, if you look at other candidates in this race, Ron DeSantis, Nikki Haley, whatever, these are people where the dollars are really being spent by their super PACs. The candidates know who the super PACs are. And I'm not saying these candidates are good people or bad people. It's a broken system. Many of them are good people tainted
They're
by
just
this broken
capitalizing
system.
on it, right?
They're playing the game as it's currently played. And so what happens is they dance to the tune of those donors. The things they say on TV or on that debate stage or whatever, that's not them speaking. That's some mega donor speaking using their vocal cords as a vehicle, as a vessel to communicate. This
how
game is
much
played.
do you think it would cost to be able to do that? What's the minimum? Is it 10 million, 50
No,
million?
it's more. I mean, you're saying
If
to have your own money.
correct,
influence
if I were to
policy.
influence a policy,
Oh,
is
if
it
you're gonna influence a policy.
let's just say, whoever's running, whoever's in the lead right now, $50 million.
Yeah.
Is that the amount? Is it 10? Is it 100?
I think if you're talking about contributing mid to high seven figures, you're definitely going to have influence on a politician. If you're in the 8-figure territory, you're in the really special club of people who are then the puppet masters. So the people who can write 8-figure checks, they're the puppet masters.
Are these companies or people?
People.
What is the message that they're trying to get across usually? Is it
Depends on what their self-interest is. I mean, different people have different self-interest.
Deregulations in their industry.
Yeah,
and-
or actually even just pet policies that they consider to be their version of what makes for a better America. That's actually the thing, is it's not exactly as you'd expect in terms of it all being directly relating to their business interests. Sometimes it is. Sometimes it is, for sure. But if only it were that simple.
Have you been approached for any of these?
For super PAC
Yeah.
stuff?
Yes,
So
huge donations say, "Hey, we'll give you $100 million,
wait,
but we want you to."
Well, it doesn't work. It never works that way, even for the other candidates.
Okay.
The way it works is they will say can't be super PAC coordination, right? So, but Ron DeSantis' entire campaign is literally being run by the super PAC. So that's not his fault. That's not Ron DeSantis' fault. But it is a tortured interpretation of how the system was supposed to work in the first place. Why even bother with the campaign contribution limits? I mean, why? If the candidate's the bulk of his campaign can be run by a super PAC, most of the staff is hired by the super PAC. The ads are all being bought by the super PAC. And you know who the super PAC donors are, and you show up at their events to raise the money. Why bother with the farce? Mm-hmm. So the beauty of our system is supposed to be that every citizen's voice and vote counts equally, regardless of the number of green pieces of paper they control, and that culminates in the ballot box. That's a farce. That's just not the system we have in the United States of America. And the worst part of it is we create this myth that that's how it works, when in fact that's not how it works. And so every politician dances to the tune of their biggest donor. It's like as the sun rises in the east and sets in the west, it's like a law of nature. Every politician dances to the tune, like a circus monkey, to their biggest donor. Now, in my case, that biggest donor is me. If you're investing in your own campaign, the way the rules work is that the 6,600 limit applies to everybody else. But if it's your own money, you can put in an unlimited amount. So I've put in over, I think, 15 plus million. I have to look up the exact number. It's over 15 for sure, $1 million into this campaign. Well, I'd rather do that than be somebody else's circus monkey. But it is a broken system. And it is the dirty little secret in American politics.
And those who don't,
there's the donor puppet masters pulling the strings.
those who do not dance to the tune don't even end up becoming politicians because they don't
end up,
win.
not the ones you hear of.
They don't end up winning. One thing that really frustrates me are the bureaucrats that you talked about in your book that then become upper management or sit on boards, make millions of dollars, all the while when they're in the public office, they're just like a dancing puppet, like you said, for those industries that they will then join, make 7-figure salaries after their term.
Yeah. It's the real one of the real divides in this country is not between black or white or Democrat or Republican even. It's between what I call this managerial class in Woke Inc. That's what I was talking about. The same kind of middle to upper management that staffs corporate boards of directors or is the associate dean of God knows what at some godforsaken university, to being the undersecretary of something or other in the U.S. government, to the person who sits in the ambassador to some second-tier nation abroad. It's the same horizontal pool of people that are crushing the will of the everyday citizen. And I would put the super PAC puppet masters in that category.
Do you find that there's a balance, though, between going with some of these large donors and getting your own message across? Like, let's just say that's the only way to become president.
That's what I'm doing.
But let's just say that's the only way to be president, is that you have to get these donations. Do you find there to be a balance between it?
I think that's...
Because otherwise, then it might never happen.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. It's one thing to write Woke Inc. Like, that was easy for me. The hard part is if your mission is actually to change this country, you got to be oriented towards your ends. Now, I'm being an idealist about this, but my hope is in the modern era versus at least even 7-8 years ago, we can reach people directly through other mediums. That's why I'm talking to you guys. I'm talking to other people, reaching people directly on the hope that we can still break that system. So I'm running against that system. I'm not running against any other candidate. I'm running against that system. And because I've been blessed to live the American dream in this country, I have real resources to be able to put into this in a way that somebody who wanted to challenge the system without those resources couldn't. So I don't want to compromise on principle there. Are there people, if people want to support me in whatever way, I'm not going to change what I say for them, and they know that. I'm not dancing to anybody's tune. But if people want to support me, great, I'll take it. But I'm not going to play the game that the other candidates play in becoming circus monkeys. But we will find out whether that's a successful strategy or not.
What would you do if that doesn't work?
I'd reflect on it and think about how else we reshape and fix a badly broken system, which is what we have today, a badly broken system. And so right now, my heart says we're going to be successful. But there's no point in speculating. I'm going to keep doing what we're doing exactly the way we've been doing it. And another 7-8 months, it's going to be very clear whether I'm the Republican nominee. And in another 13 months, it's going to be clear whether I'm the next president. So I'm not naturally a plan B kind of person. So we're going to carry that track and see how far it takes us, which I think is going to be to success in reviving this country. But if it's not, and the broken system is as broken as it is, that stops an outsider or anybody else coming in, play by the rules, but be able to get elected without playing the donor puppet master game, I think there's a lot of soul searching, not just for me, but for this country, on how we break that system. It is corrupt, and it needs to change.
I'm curious, why do so many politicians have all of these campaign promises before they get elected into being in public office, and then all of a sudden, when they're in public office, nothing changes? For example, Trump on the wall. For example, Hillary Clinton saying that everything is wrong with public policy. Everything's wrong with politics and the bureaucrats, but she's been a career politician, the same as Joe Biden. Like, why do they blame everything yet change nothing? Mm-hmm. Is this because of that distortion from their donors, and they promise all these things to be appetizing to the the
The
voters,
plebes,
and then
yeah.
all of a sudden, like they
I think
just
it's a
are
big part of
beholden
it.
towards their
I think
donors.
it's a big part of it. A lot of it's a deflection tool to be able to, advance their own political goals when in fact the things that they need to get done are the ones that their donor masters have told them to get done. I think some of this is also politicians sometimes just make mistakes. I mean, a U.S. president can't do certain things without Congress. And so you don't know what Congress is going to look like. So I try not to make promises that are legislative promises in this campaign, things that are contingent on Congress. The things I'm talking about doing are the things that I can get done without asking Congress for permission or for forgiveness. Shut down a lot of those excess bureaucratic agencies. Lay off 75% of the useless federal employee headcount. 25% of the people can get the rest of the job done. These are things that I'm going to be able to get done in my capacity as U.S. president. And the fact that I don't have promises that I've made to donors about very specific things that I'm going to do. No, the promises I've made are the ones that are transparent on media and social media to the American public every day. That's what I hope will be what allows me to succeed in a way that many of these politicians of yesterday have not. And I do think it's going to take an outsider to do that. I also think it's going to take somebody coming from the next generation to do it.
I agree.
I really do. I mean, it's
agree.
our generation, your generation, that's going to bear the brunt of the $33 trillion national deficit that we have and so on. And so I think it makes sense right now more than ever to have somebody from the different generation, from the next
I'm curious,
generation to lead us.
Where do you feel like your weak spots are? Where are your blind spots?
By definition of their blind spots,
You don't know about them. I get
yeah,
it,
but let me think about that.
because I've heard a lot of people say experience.
Yeah, I think that's a big one. I mean, I think that
But that's the oversaid one.
yeah, I think it is the oversaid one, but I think it's a legitimate question. I mean, I think that even for a lot of people in the Republican primary base who view me favorably, I think the way they view me right now, we're sitting in October. We got time to evolve this. Many of them didn't know who I was 6 months ago, but right now I think many of their headspace is great young man, breath of fresh air. That's what I hear a lot. Such an important voice in this race, and I'm glad you're running, and thank you for making the sacrifice to run, and you have a bright future ahead, and whether you're president or something else, I'm so glad you're playing a role in our country's future. That's where the headspace is. There's the 8% of people out there, 10% of people out there who are already supporting me. That's good. It was 0% in March, so we've made some progress. But the big obstacle is getting people from seeing me as a nice young man with great ideas and energy and youthful spirit who has a bright future ahead and has a role to play to say, that's going to be the guy who's my next president. And I don't think that we have grown up in an era where people are used to seeing somebody who's 38 years old be the next president. But frankly, we live in an era, I mean, you're a creator. I respect that about you, man. But Thomas Jefferson was a creator. He was 33 years old, same age, when he wrote the Declaration of Independence. And he invented the swivel chair while he was at it. Right? And Thomas Jefferson wasn't alone. I mean, Benjamin Franklin invented the Franklin stove, the bifocal spectacles, a remedy to the common cold. We don't have that spirit in this country anymore. And I think that it doesn't have to stay that way. We can bring it back. But that's my job to get done. If we get done, I'll be the next president. And that's the work that I have cut out for me in the next few months ahead.
Do you feel like you have any other weaknesses, though?
Yeah, I'm sure we all have, So do you mean substantive weaknesses or electoral weaknesses?
Substantive.
Yeah,
Yeah, like in terms of being an effective president.
correct.
I mean, countless. I think we all do. But from a personal perspective, look, I'm a guy who has, in my career, been fortunate to work with very bright people in building the businesses that I've built. That was part of my philosophy. Hire people smarter than you or more talented than you in whatever domain I can find them and need them. And when I look back at the people who I've built my businesses or enterprises with, these are some of the most talented people I'll meet in my life. I chose them intentionally with that basis because we started from scratch to build up. I think coming in and running the executive branch of the government with millions upon millions of pre-existing employees who are there not based on merit, but based on civil service protections and other factors, is a different game than being a creator from the ground up. And so I think that will be a new experience for me, one where I can't alone rely on my entrepreneurial experience to do it. Now, I think that entrepreneurial experience provides some real advantages that people otherwise coming from within politics or bureaucracy don't have. But I think the best you can do about your limitations is at least to be aware of them, humble about them. One of the ways that I did build my businesses was to surround myself with people who would challenge me, not just people who were yes men who agreed with me, people who shared the same principles and mission, and who are skilled, but often will disagree with me and be unafraid to challenge me to be the best version of myself as a leader I possibly can be. And I intend to lead the federal government the same way as well.
Do you think the government has recovered alien spacecraft?
Have they identified, was the question, unidentified flying objects?
Or alien spacecraft, or
Well, unidentified
evidence,
flying objects.
evidence
Sure.
of aliens.
Yeah.
I would say evidence of aliens, I don't know. So the question I'm answering yes to is have unidentified flying objects, yeah.
If you did discover aliens, do you think it would be in the public's best interest to know about it or not?
I think it's the public's best interest to know what the government knows. There are almost
I
no
agree.
circumstances in which the government should be hiding something from the
I
public.
But
agree.
let's say that would cause public panic. Do you believe that maybe it's worth withholding?
I think there's so this is an ancient debate from the era of Socrates and Plato to even the COVID-19 and climate change alarmism era that we're in today. There's no such thing as a noble lie. It doesn't exist. People think they're telling a lie to be noble because the public can't handle the truth. We can handle the truth. We require the truth. And the reason people don't trust the government is that the government doesn't trust the people back. And so if there's one thing I will bring to the table, we'll be transparent, tell the truth about everything. Release the Jeffrey Epstein client list. Say what we know about unidentified flying objects. Say what we know about how many federal agents were in the field on January 6th. I mean, just give it to us straight. What do we know about the vaccines before they were rolled out for COVID-19? Just be straight with the public. Release the Nashville Transgender Shooter Manifesto. Transparency. Anytime a government official has pressured a private actor to do something through the back door that the government couldn't do directly, release it. Make it known to the public.
When the government controls like where they choose to be honest and where they choose to lie, I think that's hard to draw that line. And I think that they've been a little generous on their side with it.
Yeah.
You decided to step down from Roivant because of your non-acknowledgement of BLM and, post the George Floyd tragic death.
And broader stakeholder capitalism and corporate social responsibility garbage, all that.
Exactly. But currently you're kind of campaigning based off of being a huge uniter, right? Similar to what Obama was trying to do, which is be the great uniter. How do you expect to unite the United States when you struggle to do so with Roivant?
Well, I actually think that's a good, challenging question to ask. The mission is different, right? The mission of Roivant was to develop medicines for patients who needed them that the rest of pharma had ignored. And so we actually did unite the company around that mission, even though there were people on both sides of a political question related to Black Lives Matter. Now, my job as leader of the President of the United States is to unite this country around our national values. So it depends on the mission that you have. So it's more that I fulfilled that mission. In my 7 years as CEO, I oversaw the development of a number of medicines, 5 of which are FDA approved today, one of which is life-saving therapy in kids, another for prostate cancer, another for women's health conditions, endometriosis, uterine fibroids, and others. That was that mission. Now I'm on to a different mission. And I think that the Obama or Biden version of national unity, it's fake. I think their model of national unity is just getting other people to believe what they believe and trying to get the other side who disagrees with them to compromise and then hold hands, sing Kumbaya. That's not how we're going to get to national unity. I think the way we're going to unite this country is by reviving the ideals that we share as Americans all the way going back to our founding. And those are extreme ideals. It's not through moderation or being a moderate. It is by embracing the extremism of those ideals, free speech, the idea that you guys get to speak your mind as long as I get to in return. That is a radical idea. For most of human history, it was done the other way. The unbridled pursuit of excellence and meritocracy, that is a radical, extreme idea. But I think the way we're going to unite this country is by embracing that radicalism rather than somehow engaging in moderation and compromise.
Now, I'm curious on the topic of Roivant. I'm really big into investing. And
Cool.
Yahoo Finance had an article about Roivant's negative EPS and huge losses lately. Who is sustaining those losses?
So it's actually really important to understand the biotech business model, right? I mean, Roivant's a $9-10 billion some odd public company today. And most biotech companies that are most biotech companies that are $1 or $2 or $3 billion biotech companies, on an accounting basis, their R&D costs exceed their revenue. Many of them
Correct.
don't even have products yet that are approved. But the value of that IP as those products proceed through different stages of the process make it a lot more valuable. So in Roivant's history, for example, there were years of developing these medicines and then sell them in 1 year to other distributors in like a $3 billion deal. That was what happened in my last full year as CEO or my last year and a half as CEO. So it's just a way in which if you look at normal standard, industry outside of biotech, consumer products or whatever, you analyze it differently versus an IP industry, an intellectual property industry. So most biotech companies, full stop, outside of big pharma, most innovative biotech companies worth billions of dollars are not companies that in the year that they're actually developing a given medicine are recording EPS, even though it's the accretion of the IP value.
Does it worry you, though, that the COO has sold off so many of his shares over the last year?
I have not paid attention to it, to tell you the truth. Once I've separated from the company, I've left my investments to somebody separate. But my view is that, my hope and expectation is that Roivant's going to be an incredibly successful company over the long run. I believe even in the businesses and enterprises that I've created, part of what you do is build great succession for yourself, build great teams that are able to carry on the mission such that what you create outlives you. That's what gives me a lot of satisfaction. And so, I think it's been a bear of a year in the stock market for a lot of people. Roivant's been immensely successful, and I give a ton of credit to the team that's there. I don't take credit for that. I've been out of the business for a little while now, but I give credit to the team that's there, and I take pride in having, about almost every one of those senior people there, having recruited that team, and that's
cool.
Hopefully how I'll lead this government as well, is recruit some of the best.
This is the last one.
Okay.
There's a video of you out there. I didn't realize you have an accent. And I want to show you this. I just want to get your opinion on this.
All right, let me see it.
No, Mom, I'm going to be first, but Trump is so way ahead. Way ahead, man. But I tell them I went to Harvard, I went to Yale, they look at me like, okay, நான் சொல்லிட்டே இருக்கேன். கொஞ்ச நாள்.
That's really funny.
Hey, Vivek?
Hey, man, how are you?
You're Vivek?
Yeah, Vivek Ramaswamy. Good to meet you.
Hi.
Good to meet
Hey,
you.
hey.
Yeah. What brings you to this part of town? Where are you from?
I'm like down the street, actually.
Oh, that's fantastic. So what do you do?
I'm a student. I want to play basketball.
It's fantastic. So when you have, you can be a cornerback, you can be a wide receiver. It doesn't really matter. The great thing about a meritocracy is if you're really good, you're going to make millions of dollars. And if you're not, you're going to get cut from your team. Probably not going to have any friends, probably not going to get any girls. But that's the great thing about capitalism, right? It's equality for all. And that's why on day one, we got to get rid of affirmative action.
That guy's pretty good.
His actual Vivek voice is very good.
It's really good.
He
oh
sounds
my
like-
gosh, yeah.
That's-
So this
wait,
guy might
that's-
have a
that's not you?
future career.
Is that not you?
I mean, I wish I was in my 20s. That guy's pretty good. Yeah. So maybe when they're looking for people to mock me on SNL, he'd be a pretty good.
That's a good point.
I think he'd
Yeah,
be pretty good.
SNL
at
needs
it.
to hire
Yeah.
I'm going to tell you, if you did a video with him and you brought him here, you'll get like 30 million views.
We should track him
Guaranteed.
down. Let's get the guy
Guaranteed.
here.
I've never met him. I came across this a few days ago, and I wanted to show
gone
you.
It's
viral.
pretty darn
Yeah,
good.
this
It's
has gone
pretty darn
viral.
Good. We'll get that guy
Yeah.
here. That's really fun.
He makes a living just off of impersonating.
You know what? I'm happy to have spawned creative careers, and I give that guy some credit. I have a feeling if we're successful in this, as I expect to be, I have a feeling that guy's going to be in employment for a long time to come. So I wish him well in his career.
Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate this. This has
appreciate
been
it,
such
guys.
an honor.
Thanks, guys.
Cool.
Thank you for
very
coming over.
Thank
I
you.
appreciate it.
Beautiful.
Thanks.
Thanks, guys.
I really appreciate your time. Sorry we went a little later than expected.